There's a strange kind of silence that follows victory. You've chased something for years, recognition, comfort, control, and then one morning you wake up with it all and feel nothing. The applause fades, the promotion dulls, the relationship settles into quiet routine, and in that silence, you begin to wonder if you've misunderstood what fulfillment really means. It's a question humanity has been haunted by since the dawn of thought. Why does satisfaction dissolve the moment we hold it? Aristotle saw this paradox centuries ago. He looked at people who conquered cities, amassed fortunes, achieved renown, and yet carried a faint hollowness in their gaze. They had mastered the art of success, but not the art of living. To him, the answer was not in fleeting pleasure or external praise, but in something he called eudaimonia, a word too rich to be reduced to happiness. Eudaimonia, Aristotle said, is a flourishing of the soul. It is not the thrill of joy, nor the escape from pain, but the deep sense of alignment between one's actions and one's essence. The realization that your life is not happening to you, but through you. But here's the tragedy. In our modern age, we've forgotten this key. We've mistaken stimulation for meaning. We've replaced inner harmony with endless motion, the scroll, the grind, the hustle. The ancient voice of eudaimonia is drowned beneath notifications and comparisons. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once said, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." And that's what so many of us are doing, not living, but rehearsing possible futures, projecting ourselves into better versions of who we might become, while the present moment, the only real life we ever own, slips away. Aristotle believed that fulfillment wasn't found in pleasure, nor in power, nor even in moral goodness alone. It was found in the practice of virtue, not as rigid rules, but as the art of balance. To live well, he said, is to find the middle path between excess and deficiency, between cowardice and recklessness, between indulgence and apathy, between self-obsession and self-neglect. But there's a reason this wisdom has been forgotten. Balance feels boring. It lacks the drama of extremes. In a world addicted to intensity, moderation feels like mediocrity. And yet, it is precisely this equilibrium, quiet, subtle, steady, that allows a person to feel whole. Imagine a musician who spends years chasing fame, only to rediscover, one night alone in his room, the raw joy of simply playing a note well. That moment, not broadcast, not monetized, not measured, is eudaimonia. It's the beauty of being attuned to your own soul, without an audience. And so we return to the question, what does it mean to flourish when the world rewards distraction? What does it mean to live well in an age that celebrates everything except wisdom? We stand at the same crossroads Aristotle did, though the landscape has changed. The ancient pursuit of virtue has become a quiet rebellion. To seek depth in a shallow culture is to resist an empire of noise. But perhaps that's where fulfillment still hides, not in what we achieve, but in what we refuse to lose sight of. The forgotten key is not buried in the past. It's waiting within the stillness we've been trained to avoid, the silence that comes after victory, the pause between desires, the breath before we reach for more. And if we dare to listen to that silence, it might whisper the same truth Aristotle heard. Fulfillment begins not when we gain, but when we align. It's easy to say we want a meaningful life, harder to admit that we often sabotage it in the pursuit of something louder. The human heart is a battlefield between two forces, desire and purpose. Desire pulls us outward, toward pleasure, recognition, validation. Purpose calls us inward, toward discipline, authenticity, and quiet alignment. Aristotle didn't deny desire. He understood it as part of human nature, the raw flame that animates us. But he warned that when desire becomes the master rather than the servant, it burns everything, including the soul itself. We live in a time when the world has perfected the art of stoking desire. The algorithm knows what you crave before you do. Every scroll, every ad, every image is designed to whisper, "You are not enough yet." And so we chase endlessly, breathlessly, until we mistake movement for meaning. But here's the paradox. The more we feed desire, the hungrier it grows. What once thrilled us becomes ordinary. The pleasure curve flattens. The high fades, and so we raise the dosage. More achievement, more status, more sensory noise. All in a desperate attempt to quiet the same emptiness we refuse to face. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." This, perhaps, is the most dangerous truth of our age. We have all the tools to build lives of comfort, yet we feel restless, disoriented, perpetually not there yet. Because comfort was never the goal of a human soul, integration was. Aristotle's forgotten key is that fulfillment is not a product of pleasure or possession, but of right relationship, the harmony between one's inner world and outward actions. When our desires serve our purpose, life feels coherent. But when they revolt, we become divided against ourselves. Look around. A man builds a career that impresses everyone except himself. A woman curates a perfect life online yet feels unseen when she's offline. A student studies a field not out of curiosity, but fear, the fear of being less than others. Each is caught in the same invisible trap, the illusion that fulfillment comes from outside in. Aristotle would have called it akrasia, the weakness of will, knowing what is good yet doing the opposite. It is not ignorance that destroys us, but misalignment, a fracture between knowing and being. And so, the war rages quietly within us. The desire for pleasure fights the longing for peace. We crave meaning, but fear the stillness it requires. We want wisdom, but prefer distraction. The ancients knew this conflict well. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle wrote that man becomes what he practices. We are what we repeatedly do, he said, not in our achievements, but in our habits. And so, the path to fulfillment is not a single revelation, but a series of small, invisible alignments, the daily shaping of the soul toward balance, clarity, and virtue. To live this way is not glamorous. It means choosing silence over noise, presence over performance, integrity over image. It means allowing the outer life to follow the inner one, even if it costs you applause. But here lies the true courage Aristotle spoke of, the courage to act rightly even when no one sees, to pursue harmony rather than victory. Because fulfillment, as he saw it, is not a feeling to be chased, but a state to be cultivated. It is the quiet strength of a soul that no longer needs to prove itself. And yet, most of us are still trapped in the outer chase, not because we are weak, but because we have forgotten what power truly is. To find that forgotten power, we must confront the heart of the paradox, that true freedom begins in discipline, and true joy is found not in indulgence, but in mastery. There comes a moment in every life when the noise collapses, when the routines that once held us together suddenly lose their shape. It might arrive quietly, like a fog that settles without warning, or violently, like a collapse, a breakup, a failure, a loss, a morning where even the mirror feels unfamiliar. The world outside keeps moving, yet something inside you has stopped. That stillness, that ache, is not the end. It's the threshold. For Aristotle, this was the beginning of phronesis, practical wisdom, the point where theory dies and life itself becomes the teacher. He believed that wisdom isn't learned through books or arguments, but through experience that cuts through illusion. Pain, he said, refines us because it forces us to look inward, to see not what we want to be, but what we are. This inner turning is not glamorous. It's disorienting. When the scaffolding of our ambitions collapses, we see how much of our identity was built on the fragile approval of others. The roles, the titles, the achievements, all masks we've mistaken for faces. And in that moment of exposure, a strange possibility appears. What if you don't need to become more, but simply return to yourself? The philosopher Alan Watts once said, "We seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own. For we think in terms of languages and images which we did not invent. How much of what we desire, fear, or pursue is truly ours, and how much is inherited, programmed, borrowed?" When Aristotle spoke of virtue, he was not moralizing. He was describing alignment. To live virtuously was to let reason, the voice of your truest self, guide the unruly orchestra of desires. It meant cultivating the kind of character that acts rightly because it resonates with who you are, not because someone is watching. And so, the turning point in the human journey is not the moment we gain the world, but the moment we question whether it was worth the cost. Imagine this. A man spends decades building an empire. His name carries weight, his home echoes with luxury, his calendar full. Yet one evening, sitting alone in the quiet after a long day, he feels the first flicker of emptiness. Not because he lacks, but because he has everything except himself. That flicker is not despair. It's the beginning of awakening. It's the soul remembering what it was made for. Aristotle would say that in that moment, the man stands at the doorway of Eudaimonia. Not because he has arrived, but because he has begun to see clearly. He now faces a question that terrifies and frees in equal measure. What if fulfillment has nothing to do with adding, but everything to do with aligning? The Greeks believed the self was like a lyre, a stringed instrument that, when tuned, could produce harmony. Most of us, Aristotle might say, live slightly out of tune, our actions discordant with our essence. We feel the tension, but mistake it for failure rather than a call to retune. To live well, then, is not to chase louder music but to tune the strings of the soul, patience, courage, moderation, truth, until life itself hums with coherence. This tuning is the art of becoming inwardly whole. It demands honesty, humility, and the courage to face the parts of ourselves we'd rather keep hidden. But it is only by descending into that quiet interior that we can rebuild from the inside out. For in the end, the greatest wisdom is not found in conquering the world, but in governing the self. And when that happens, something extraordinary shifts. Life stops feeling like a performance and begins to feel like a conversation between the soul and the cosmos. Once the soul has turned inward, once the illusions begin to fade, something remarkable starts to unfold. Life slows, not because the world has changed, but because you have stopped running. The noise still hums outside, but it no longer commands you. The endless chase loses its pull, and a quiet strength begins to rise from within. A strength not of conquest, but of composure. Aristotle believed that this composure, this inner harmony, was the essence of a good life. Not pleasure, not wealth, not fame, but balance. A life in which reason and desire, mind and emotion, discipline and spontaneity, all play their part in proportion. We often imagine virtue as something rigid, sterile, a moral code carved in stone. But to Aristotle, virtue was an art, a living rhythm. It was knowing, moment by moment, how to respond rightly. Not too much, not too little. To feel anger when injustice demands it, but not to be consumed by rage. To enjoy pleasure, yet never become its slave. To care deeply, but without losing oneself in the process. This, he said, was the golden mean. The middle path that is neither cold nor indulgent, but alive with wisdom. And though the term sounds simple, to live it requires extraordinary sensitivity, the kind that can only grow through reflection, humility, and practice. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius echoed this spirit centuries later when he wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He, too, understood what Aristotle meant, that fulfillment is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of inner order. Modern life has made us forget this. We mistake excitement for vitality, drama for depth, productivity for purpose. We fill every silence with sound, every pause with distraction, every discomfort with consumption, because stillness feels like death. But Aristotle would remind us, it is in stillness that the soul breathes. When a person rediscovers that stillness, their perception changes. They no longer see life as something to conquer, but as something to steward. Every choice becomes a stroke of the brush, shaping the portrait of one's character. Every conversation becomes a mirror. Every moment an opportunity to practice balance, to bring the self into harmony with truth. This is what Aristotle meant when he said the highest human function is contemplation. Not idle thought, but a deep participation in reality, the kind that unites intellect and heart, action and awareness. To contemplate, in his view, was not to escape the world, but to see it clearly, to see the beauty in its order, the tragedy in its impermanence, and the quiet miracle of simply existing with awareness. In this state, fulfillment ceases to be a destination. It becomes a quality of being, the byproduct of living truthfully, attentively, courageously. You still feel pain. You still face loss. But those experiences no longer fragment you. They deepen you. And perhaps that is the forgotten truth of Aristotle's wisdom. That peace is not found in the absence of struggle, but in learning how to suffer meaningfully. When you suffer consciously, when you refuse to numb or flee, the wound becomes a teacher. Pain becomes a compass, pointing you toward what truly matters. For the harmonized soul is not unbroken. It is integrated. It knows light and shadow, joy and grief, action and rest. It has learned, through trial, how to remain centered in a world forever pulling it off course. Fulfillment, then, is not the prize at the end of the journey. It is the melody that begins to play when your life and your nature finally move in rhythm. There is a certain silence that falls near the end of every journey, not the silence of emptiness, but of arrival. It's the hush that follows understanding, when you finally see that the thing you've been chasing was never somewhere else. It was here, all along, waiting beneath the noise, the striving, the endless becoming. Aristotle's forgotten key was never hidden in temples or texts. It was hidden in attention, the way you walk, the way you listen, the way you inhabit this fleeting, fragile moment as though it were enough. He saw the good life not as perfection but as practice, a lifelong conversation between reason and passion, action and rest, thought and being. To live well was not to escape the mess of existence, but to dance within it gracefully, to bring order to chaos without extinguishing its fire. And perhaps that's why his teaching feels so alien to us today. We live in an age obsessed with outcomes, where everything must be measured, optimized, explained. But fulfillment resists quantification. It doesn't shout. It hums softly, in the way you breathe, in the depth of your presence, in the steadiness of your gaze. The psychoanalyst Viktor Frankl, who endured the horrors of the concentration camps, once wrote, "Happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue." He understood what Aristotle did, that fulfillment arises not when we demand it, but when we live in alignment with something greater than ourselves. It comes as a side effect of purpose, a quiet grace that follows the soul that lives truthfully. If you listen closely, you might feel it, that subtle shift within you when your actions begin to match your values, when your words begin to echo your heart. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's calm, almost imperceptible. But it is real. It is the feeling of being whole, not perfect, not untouchable, but integrated. The modern mind resists this simplicity. It wants more, faster, louder. It wants to arrive. But the soul speaks a different language, one of rhythm, patience, and return. It does not seek climax, but coherence. To live Aristotle's wisdom in our time is to rebel against haste. It is to slow down in a culture that equates slowness with failure, to feel deeply in a world that numbs, to think clearly when the air is thick with noise, to stand alone if necessary, because truth often begins in solitude. And so, the fulfilling life is not a mountain to climb, but a melody to learn. One you will spend your whole life tuning. There will be dissonance. There will be days when your soul feels out of key, when confusion and doubt cloud your inner compass. But even then, especially then, the work continues. The tuning never ends. Because the good life, as Aristotle saw it, is not a final state, but a living process, a conversation that deepens until your very being becomes its answer. To flourish is not to stand triumphant, but to remain faithful to the unfolding of who you are. And maybe that's the final paradox. The fulfilled person is not the one who has found all the answers, but the one who no longer fears the questions. So when you feel lost, when the noise grows too loud or the silence too deep, return to the ancient truth that still hums beneath it all, that fulfillment is not something you find, but something you remember, a remembering of balance, of virtue, of being at one with what is. And when you remember it, even for a moment, the world changes shape. The ordinary becomes sacred, the mundane becomes miraculous, and the quiet, beating rhythm of your own heart becomes enough. The symphony was never unfinished. You were simply learning how to listen,